All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today we're talking all about the Falcons' 2021 red zone struggles, why Kyle Pitts only had one touchdown this past season, and why the offensive line improving plays a pivotal role in the team getting better in the red zone in 2022.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me, I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans, and of course, the host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. And of course, Locked On Falcons is free and available on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, and Spotify. And of course, now free and available on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel, where you can usually catch the show most weeknights a few hours earlier before the audio drops. So today's episode of Locked On Falcons is going to be all about the Falcons red zone offense. And in my year-end positional review of the tight end position and talking about Kyle Pitts and some of the things that he wasn't necessarily able to quite achieve in his historic rookie season, one of the rabbit holes I went down was going back and looking through the red zone, and I realized that, rather than devoting 5 minutes of that episode and dragging on that episode, let's do a full deep dive on that for an entire episode. And that's what we're going to do today. We will talk about sort of specifically Pitts's misusage or whatever the case may be in the red zone a little bit later. But first, I want to sort of give you an overview of the Falcons' red zone performance in 2021, and it wasn't particularly good. They finished 24th in red zone efficiency, converting 54% of their 54 red zone trips into touchdowns. And it wasn't necessarily always that rough. By the bye week, through those first 5 games, the Falcons ranked 8th in red zone efficiency, converting 69% of their red zone trips. And basically, shortly after their bye week and starting really with that Cowboys game, the Falcons really hit sort of a rough patch thereafter and through the rest of the season. And outside of a couple of games, mainly the Jaguars and Lions games, I wonder why. They were able to successfully convert all their red zone trips in those 2 games, 5 times combined. But outside of those that 2 games, starting with the Dallas game and finishing the season, their red zone conversion rate was just 32%, which is pretty much atrocious. The worst red zone efficiency in the league last year was the Giants, and they converted 45%. So the Falcons were significantly worse than the worst red zone team in the majority of their games in the second half of the season. And obviously, we recognize that red zone efficiency can be potentially a deciding factor in games. Looking back over the last 5 seasons combined, about 27%. So almost a third of NFL games are decided by 4 points or less. And, a conversion in the red zone can mean the difference between 3 and 7 points. And so therefore, potentially, one or so successfully converted red zone trip in a game, over the course of a season could wind up, being a 4 or 5 win swing in that regard. So, you know, that shouldn't be too surprising when you learn that in the Falcons' 7 wins this year, that were all decided by 1 score or less, the Falcons converted 68% of their red zone trips, and in their 10 losses, they converted 41%. So you're basically, in the games that the Falcons played well, they look like one of the best red zone teams in the league, and in the games that they lost, they obviously look like one of the worst. And I think certainly in the second half of the season, had they been a little bit better than what they were and closer to league average, which was about 58% last year, I don't know if that would have necessarily resulted in them winning more games, but I certainly think it probably would have changed the narrative that you often heard, at least here on Locked On Falcons, from me, about this team's inability to look more competitive in some of these losses. That, a couple of red zone successful conversions here or there sprinkled throughout the season, and all of a sudden the Falcons aren't losing all these games as much as they did by 2 scores. Maybe they're losing some of those games by 1 score. And again, we may not sit there and say, oh, they should have beaten San Francisco, oh, they should have beaten Buffalo or whoever, but we would have at least said they were able to keep it a lot closer for a larger chunk of the game than they actually did. And so, with that being said, like, my general thoughts on the Falcons red zone play calling, and I don't necessarily have anything profound or deep or meaningful in that regard. We'll certainly get into the details more when we talk specifically about how the team utilized Kyle Pitts a little bit later on. But overall, it seemed like to me part of the reason, or at least something that didn't necessarily sit right with me, not to say it was absolutely a problem, but they didn't seem to design a ton of plays that were designed to go into the end zone, right? A lot of their red zone stuff, particularly the further out they were, like really until they got inside the 5, they weren't really designing throws into the end zone. And out beyond that, it seemed like it was a lot of underneath stuff, a lot of, curls and outs and crossers and screens and whatnot, plays that were kind of designed seemingly to get the ball into the playmakers' hands and let them cook after the catch. And we saw obviously early in the season, guys like Patterson, even Mike Davis to a certain extent, pretty early in the season, have some success doing that, taking some of these simple checkdowns and shedding multiple tackles and scoring on some of those plays. And I don't think it's a coincidence that week 3, week through week 9 stretch where the Falcons were really efficient in winning a lot of games. It seemed like the majority of those types of plays were being made. So, I think when you're not having guys do that, and that seemed to be the issue as we got later into the season, it seemed a lot harder for this team to find the end zone. And we'll sort of circle back a little bit later in the episode to talk about ways that they can improve. But speaking of guys not being able to find into the end zone, let's talk about Kyle Pitts and how and why he finished this historic season with just 1 touchdown. And a lot of that had to do with some red zone struggles, and we'll get into that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons podcast, which I thank you guys again for making your first listen each and every day. And I always have recommendations for what your second listen should be, and of course that should be the Locked On Braves podcast, where they're hooking you up with the latest on my cousin Freddie and all the things going on with that Braves team this offseason. So go subscribe to the Locked On Braves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and it's free and available on all the same podcast platforms that you can find Locked On Falcons, including on YouTube. So while the Falcons are struggling in the red zone, you don't necessarily have to struggle with your wallet when you go to the gas pump. With a new app called GetUpside, you can get cash back and save every time you fill up. And you basically get cash back every time you put gas in your car. Every gallon you get cash back, and there's no catch. It's all free. You download GetUpside app for free in the App Store on Google Play. You open up the app, you go to any of the thousands of eligible gas stations around the country and around the world, and you claim their offer. You fill up, they put money into your account, and you can cash out anytime with payments directly into your bank account, PayPal, or you can do what I do, put them on Amazon gift cards. And when you open an account now on GetUpside and use our special promo code Touchdown, you get a bonus 25 cents back per gallon on your first fill up. Don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Download the free GetUpside app and use our promo code Touchdown when you sign up. That's GetUpside, promo code Touchdown, to start saving every time you fill up. So we know that Kyle Pitts only had 1 touchdown this year, and that was a touchdown against the Jets in London. And it's going to be fun to have the joke that, Kyle Pitts is yet to score a touchdown in a Falcons uniform on this continent. Going back to his days at Florida. And funny enough, the last touchdown he did score at Florida was in Mercedes-Benz Stadium in the SEC championship game a couple of years ago. But, I think it'll be funny for someone to pull an Evan Birchfield. Shout out to my guy, Evan, and basically do a thing on Twitter or something where it's like, oh, and another day has, the sun has come up once more over the state, over the United States. And, It's been X number of days, 300 and something days since Kyle Pitts has scored a touchdown on American soil, and keep that going until we get to August or September or whenever he finally gets that touchdown. And at that point, it'll be in the 600s or something like that. So that would be a fun thing for someone to do on Twitter or whatever the case may be. But Pitts scored one touchdown. He had 14 red zone targets. He only caught 4 of those passes. That's 29%. And there were 81 receivers in the NFL this past year that had at least 10 or more red zone targets. And that 29% was the third lowest catch rate among those 81 receivers, with only the Rams' Van Jefferson and the Giants' Kenny Golladay being lower on that list. And of course, only one of those was converted into a touchdown, and so a 7% conversion rate, and that was the sixth lowest among that 81 receiver group. And the only players, there were 5 players that did not score a single touchdown on their red zone targets, and that was Cole Beasley, Cole Kmet, Darrell Williams, the running back, Ray McLeod, and Kenny Golladay. So not a great look for Kyle Pitts to be in a list with running backs. I'm not a huge Cole Kmet guy, in 5'8" wide receivers, right? So ultimately, I think, the one of the key issues for Pitts getting better is being better at the catch point. I think the other issue for him was poor play design. But let's break down the whole catch point thing by breaking down his targets, right? 7 of his red zone targets were not throws in the end zone. And again, they were mostly out patterns and flat routes and rollouts and stuff, and curls and pivots and stuff like that. So again, the sort of going back to that general tendency that I talked about earlier, where the Falcons tended to, throw short throws and letting guys create after the catch. Now, on those 7 non-end zone targets, 3 of them he did catch. He dropped another one. 2 were uncatchable, and 1 he caught, but he was out of bounds against Washington. So clearly, it's not a hands issue when it comes to him, because at least of the 5 that he could realistically catch, he did snag 4 of them, if you technically include that one against Washington where his feet were out of bounds, but he did catch the ball. Which means that the remaining 14, 7 of them were throws in the end zone, and he only caught 1 of those, and that was obviously the one that he scored against the Jets. Of those 7 in the end zone, 5 of them were lob or fade type of throws. 2 were out patterns. The 1 catch was on an out pattern, and the other one on that out pattern, he wasn't necessarily able to win at the catch point where a defensive player was able to contest it. Of the 5 lobs, 2 of them were uncatchable, meaning that they were over his head. 2 he lost at the catch point, and 1 was catchable. It was against the Giants, where he was trying to use one hand to box out the defender and the other one to catch the football, and obviously he couldn't reel it in one-handed. I won't necessarily call that a drop because he only got one hand on it, but it certainly was a ball that he could have realistically caught. So of the 5 targets in the end zone that were catchable, he only caught 1. And so that's why I say Pitts needs to be better at the catch point, because you can't go 1 for 5 at the catch point and expect to play at a high level in this league. And before we continue on that point, I do want to note that there were 2 other targets that Kyle Pitts didn't technically have because they were counted as throwaways. But there were 2 other plays that clearly were designed to go to him. And there was another lob against the Bucks in the second Bucks matchup, where they basically asked him to run a simple hitch into the end zone on a 1st and goal at the 1. And then pressure led to a throwaway from Matt Ryan. And on the ensuing 2nd down, they ran a designed rollout to Jake Matthews. And then on the 3rd and goal at the 1, that was the play that Drew Doman botched the snap and basically ruined what appeared to be a running play. And the Falcons had to settle for 3 points. And at that point in the game against the Bucks, they had an opportunity, if they had converted, to go up 14-13 in the second quarter. And getting back to the point I made earlier, where it would have looked like, again, no one thinks that the Falcons were going to win that game against Bucks, but it would have definitely looked like a much more competitive game had the Falcons taken the lead at that point in the game. Then the other play was a play against the Bills on a 3rd and 5. It was sort of an underneath crosser where Matt Ryan basically threw the ball away to salvage a field goal opportunity. And so those 2 plays do sort of fit the pattern that we stated before, but don't officially go into the books as Pitts targets. But going back to the whole point about him at the catch point, it's not a surprise to me that Kyle Pitts kind of struggled in that regard, because that was not necessarily a strength of his at Florida. That was something I noted in my scouting report. That was something I noted before the season when we were having conversations about, how much confidence do we have that Matt Ryan is going to have a big year, because he doesn't necessarily have that guy like a Julio, like a Roddy, like a Tony Gonzalez, that guy that can consistently be that security blanket and win at the catch point. Because despite his size and his length, Kyle Pitts wasn't great at the catch point in college. Now, when it came to using that length and that wingspan to make, adjusting to the ball in the air and show that body control and catch away from his frame, he was great at that. But when it came tight in his frame, when the ball was here and he had a defender draped on his back, he wasn't necessarily as good there. And I think basically to reach his full potential as an NFL player, let alone in the red zone, he's going to have to get better at that. And that's something that there were a number of missed opportunities this season where he wasn't able to make plays on that, some back shoulder throws and all those types of things, where I feel like Kyle Pitts, if he can start making those plays, you're going to see, basically an unstoppable monster in this league. So again, going back to the point I made earlier this week, when talking about the tight end position, Pitts is just sort of scratching the surface of his potential if he can get better there. But the other factor is, of course, the vanilla play calling. And, I said throughout the year, it didn't seem like the Falcons were doing anything creative with Kyle Pitts. And that to me was evidenced by their heavy reliance on lob plays when it came to designing plays, inside that 5-yard line when he was asked to go in the end zone. And part of that reason why that's a bad thing, you would think, oh, well, he's a big guy, you throw it up and let him go get the football. But like, that's never been a strength of Matt Ryan throughout his NFL career. It's not to say that Matt Ryan can't do those things, but we've seen time and time again over the course of Matt Ryan's career that, fades and lobs and those types of throws aren't really his strength. And then the other factor is you just kind of think Arthur Smith would be better than that. And it just sort of speaks to not necessarily maximizing the talent that he has. And to me, that's, the over reliance on the most basic play that you can draw up in the red zone, which is a lob or a fade or whatever you want to call it, to me is a symptom of not necessarily playing to the strengths of his players. And, it's notable because I didn't necessarily do a deep dive on Arthur Smith's red zone offense back in his, Tennessee days when I was doing a study of his offense, because you looked at the success that he had. And then you basically, like a lot of people assumed, okay, well, he's not going to be any worse than Dirk Cutter is. And I just, you watch like 10 plays of the red zone offense and you're like, oh yeah, he's better. I watched just enough to basically confirm that preconception that I had that he was going to be an automatic upgrade in that regard. So I don't necessarily know if this was symptomatic of what he did in Tennessee. Based off of what little I saw, I didn't see this type of vanilla-ness and whatnot. But it is a situation where I feel like he has to be better again alongside Kyle Pitts. But again, I don't have as much of a beef with Kyle Pitts not being great in this area, because again, I don't think he was that great in that area in college, but I do expect Arthur Smith to be better at that. And so what we're going to do to wrap up today's episode is get into ways that they can get better, which, may be included explosiveness and running the football and improving the offensive line. So we'll get into all of that as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons, guys. But before we get there, I want to let you know that Peacock and Williamson are hitting the road to LA for Super Week next month. And of course, make sure you check out NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson each and every day on the Peacock and Williamson NFL show, the flagship show here on the Locked On Podcast Network, giving you all the coverage of all the NFL games and all the NFL stories between now and Super Bowl 56. And of course, you can subscribe to Peacock and Williamson on your preferred podcast platform. So, getting into the Super Bowl and making picks and all that stuff, it's interesting weekend coming up where you have the conference championship games. And I'm looking at these lines with the Rams being 3.5 point favorites over the 49ers, the Chiefs being 7 point favorites against the Bengals. And I'm not loving these lines because I feel like these underdogs have a much better shot than they're giving. And I don't feel good about betting on two teams that I don't think are going to win the game. So I'm thinking about, maybe going to money line, sort of for an outright winner, or maybe just betting the over unders, with it being 54 for the Chiefs Bengals game and 46 for the Rams 49ers game. And of course, BetOnline is the best spot, the number one spot for me to get in on that wagering action before the weekend. Of course, it's a new year and there's a new website at betonline.ag. So make sure you sign up today with the promo code locked on and you'll receive a 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. And no matter how you bet and whatever sport you're betting on, BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports, whether it's football, basketball, hockey, boxing, UFC, all the way to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait and take advantage of all the amazing offers available at BetOnline, where the game starts. So how can the Falcons get better in the red zone? Well, they just got to get better, right? Because there's so many ways that they need to get better that, it's pretty much everything they have to get better at. But, one way of getting better is getting more opportunities. More bites at the apple doesn't hurt in that regard. And they had roughly, when you look at the amount of drives that they had versus how many red zone opportunities they were about league average in that regard. The league average in terms of the percentage of drives that result in a red zone opportunity was 30.6 and the Falcons were 30.5. Um, that's 15th ranked. And you look at several of the teams that were ranked above them, 11 of the top 13 teams in that category in terms of percentage of, drives that result in a red zone trip, made the playoffs. And the two that didn't, the Chargers and the Colts, most people think should have made the playoffs. So, what also stood out doing the research is the link between explosiveness and the Falcons' red zone trips. I've kept a record on how many drives that the team has that include 20 plus yard plays, those explosive big plays that you guys know I'm obsessed with. I have that data going back to 2010. And what's notable about the 2021 Falcons is they had 41 drives this year, which were big plays, which was tied for the lowest in this 12-year data sample going back to 2010, where they had 41 in that 2010 season as well. So again, that's part of getting more explosive. But 68% of those drives that included a big play saw the team reach the red zone, which was the highest percentage of this entire 12-year data set. The average over the previous 11 years was 55%. On their 132 drives that did not include a 20 plus yard play, only 20% reached the red zone, which was the lowest of the data set going back to at least 2014. Now, the average across the previous years was 22%. So 22 to 20, it's only slightly below average, but it's notable that, generally speaking, in the Dan Quinn era, they were a little bit better than they were this past year when it came to, dinking and dunking and getting into the red zone. But all of that is to say nothing particularly profound. I just found that interesting. And it's just reason number, 413, why the team needs to be a little bit more explosive, because it does seem like, they get more opportunities to get in the red zone when they are explosive. But, once they get there, how do they get better? And I do think running the football is probably a big factor in this, and is probably a big factor in why Smith was so successful in Tennessee. I don't think that's a bold claim to make. I don't necessarily know exactly where the Falcons and Titans fit league wide, comparing their 2021 and 2020 seasons and some of these running metrics. But I did notice, looking at the data in terms of yards per carry on red zone runs, the Falcons ranked 5th in the NFL this past season, which surprised me. So it's probably due to a couple of long runs, like that 19-yard run by Quadri Olson, that 17-yard touchdown run by Mike Davis, and a couple of others from Cordero Patterson probably skewed the numbers a little bit, since probably the majority of red zone runs are like 3 to 5 yards. But I did calculate their success rate on those red zone runs, and the Falcons were at 52%. And for those of you not familiar with success rate, over 50% is a good success rate. So I was surprised to see that number. Again, I don't necessarily know if that stacks up, how that stacks up league wide, but I was surprised to see the Falcons be as efficient as they were running the ball in the red zone. But I did look back at the 2020 Titans for a sake of comparison to sort of see if 52% holds up to what they did. And of course, not to my surprise, the Titans were significantly better. Their red zone rushing success was 62%. And I'll give you two guesses as to what was the cause of why they were much more efficient running the football in the red zone. Maybe it rhymes with Steric and Dinry. So when I looked at the Falcons' success rate on third and fourth downs on those do or die red zone runs, their success rate fell to 36%. So there's where they really struggled when it came to running in the red zone, when it was a do or die, those third and ones, those fourth and ones, etc. And if you take Matt Ryan's scrambles out of the equation, where he was able to convert a couple of those, it actually falls to 33%. And then you just compare that to Derrick Henry or Steric Dinry, whatever you want to call him. His third and fourth, down success rate in the red zone was 90% in 2020. It's just not fair when you 90%. Like, again, 45% is a good red zone, and so it's a good success rate. And so Derrick Henry is basically twice as good as a good running back would be in general when it comes to the red zone runs. 90% is crazy to me. So what's interesting is, on first and second down, Derrick Henry's success rate in 2020 was 57%, which is only slightly better than what the combined success rate of Patterson and Davis was, which was 54%. So it does seem like the offensive line, where Derrick Henry certainly adding some value due to his skill set, but the Falcons offensive line, when it needed a yard in those like third and ones, those third and twos, etc., they couldn't get that yard. But when it was like first and 10 or second and 7 or whatever the case may be, they were much more effective in those situations than the Titans offensive line. And of course, Derrick Henry, I'm sure the Titans offensive line isn't responsible for the 90% success rate on third downs, right? Like, maybe they're responsible for like 50% of it, but the other 40% is all Derrick Henry. So I think when we talk about how and why the Falcons can improve, in addition to getting better in terms of their play calling, maybe some of it rests on the offensive line. And to a certain extent, not necessarily when it comes to running the football, but in throwing the football, maybe some of the issues that I had with their play calling, their conservative approach there, is due to the offensive line. This has been a common talking point here on the Locked On Falcons for the last several months, of how much of the Falcons' conservative vanillaness is due to Arthur Smith trying to hide how bad the pass protection is. Right. And again, I didn't chart it with the red zone plays, and when I went back and watched all the red zone plays, but it did seem notable to me how often Matt Ryan was under fire, under pressure, being hit a ton. And again, don't know how much it was, but it just seemed like, just observationally, that it was a bunch. And the 49ers game stood out as probably the most prominent example of a game where the offensive line breakdowns really hurt that team in the red zone, where there was a couple of easy conversions where the Falcons completely failed to hold up for more than like a second in the red zone. So that may be a cause of why the Falcons were so reliant on some of that underneath stuff. That may be a cause, that underneath stuff in the red zone, and sort of the check downs and not pushing the ball down the field for large chunks of the season and all that various stuff. So while I think Pitts can be better, I think Arthur Smith can be better, it does feel like the red zone success may be linked to the offensive line getting better, just like so much of the offensive success is going to be linked to the offensive line getting better. That's why I think it's important that the Falcons can upgrade this offensive line this offseason. That's something that Dave Choate, a guest that we had on yesterday's episode, talked about as the second biggest offseason goal / priority, which is upgrading potentially 2 of those offensive line spots. And I feel like it's got to be done. Now, again, I don't know, if I'm not super optimistic that they'll get 2, but I do feel like 1 has to get done. And you guys know which spot I think that should be. And again, it's not to sit here and blame Jalen Mayfield and be like, oh, he's the reason why the red zone offense was bad, or he's the reason why the running game is bad, or he's the reason. Like, it's not to say, as I've said since September, I feel like this team kind of set Jalen Mayfield up to fail. But to me, what's going to be fascinating to watch this offseason, and to me, not to be melodramatic or anything like that, but will go a very, very, very long way, to assessing the credibility of this new regime is how much emphasis do they put on upgrading that left guard position? Because you go back to what Dave said on the show, he didn't sound particularly optimistic that the team was going to try to upgrade that left guard position, that they were going to do the thing that we hammered Thomas Dimitroff and company so hard for buying in on their ability to coach up guys. Jalen Mayfield's their guy, so they'll coach him up and they'll try to replace Hennessy and or Caleb McGarry, which again is a common thing that you see around the league. But I really do hope that this new regime is better than that, because again, to use an example that I've used a couple of times now on the podcast, that's exactly what the Falcons did with Vic Beasley. They doubled down on Vic Beasley multiple times, believing that, we can coach up our guy. He's going to get right back to being that high-level pass rusher, and they were wrong about that, and that had caused a lot of sort of ramifications, and we're still feeling those ripple effects today. That's why the pass rush is such a big need right now, because of decisions like that led to them going out and overpaying for Dante Fowler and putting this team in a further cap hole and all these various things. Again, not trying to sit here and blame like Vic Beasley's the cause of it, but that decision to double down on Vic Beasley, you can make a very strong case is a big reason why the Falcons pass rush is so bad as it is today. Again, that's not Vic Beasley's fault. That's Thomas Dimitroff. That's Dan Quinn's fault. And so I contrast that frequently with Ozzie Newsome, a general manager that Terry Fontenot, reportedly looks up to, and talk about how they didn't double down on Courtney Upshaw when they made him their top pick in 2012. And he proved his rookie year that he was not going to be the guy to line up next to Terrell Suggs and be that bookend, top end pass rusher. They didn't double down on that. They went out the very next offseason, had an opportunity to upgrade that spot, and they went out and signed an all-pro in Elvis Dumervil. And it didn't mean that they kicked, Courtney Upshaw to the curb, because he continued to have a role on early downs, playing against the run, playing on special teams, all these various things. But when it came to shove, they didn't, trust in their ability. We're going to coach him up, right? They went out there, and when you think about Dean Pease's defense, and this was why I was so anti people saying Dean Pease is going to fix it and magically scheme up pressure, is that when you look at Dean Pease's history as a defensive coordinator, his successful pass rushes were 2013, 2014, when it was Terrell Suggs, a future Hall of Famer, and Elvis Dumervil, an all-pro, lining up. And it wasn't him scheming pressure in those years when he's had good pass rushes. So to me, that's a model that the Falcons have to follow. And again, not to sit here and be like, Jalen Mayfield's, the worst human being in the world. None of that stuff, guys. Like, we criticize Jalen Mayfield because he was bad, right? Like, I'm being honest with you. I'm not going to sit here and blow smoke up your butt and say, oh, no, he was actually pretty good. No, I'm not going to do that, right? I'll leave that to other podcasts and other Falcon fans and other Falcon bloggers and all that various stuff. They can blow smoke up your butt and tell you that Jalen Mayfield was secretly really good. And you just gotta pay attention. No, he was bad. Right. And so the point is, how do you fix the problem? Do you sit here and you double down on it and say, we'll coach him up, he's young, we'll figure it out? Or do you sit here and say, let's nip this in the bud and let's solve this problem? And again, I think it's going to have potential ramifications and that trickle down effect for several areas of this roster, including the red zone, including the run game, including the pass protection. So I sit here and I go, like, you got to get this fixed, man. And if you don't, and if you do the Dimitroff, if you do the thing, we'll coach up our guy, we'll figure it out. Again, it may work out. But I'm going to sit here and tell you, I've seen this movie before, right? It does not end well. You know what I'm saying? It does not end well. I've seen this movie before, and I feel like you're going to be paying that price for years to come, simply because, you have this sort of hubris that you can take what was, essentially, again, not to kill Jalen Mayfield, as we often do on this podcast, but was essentially, based off of some metrics, a historically bad season, and say, we'll figure it out. Like, okay, good luck with that. It's not my job on the line. I'm gonna be here doing a podcast. So, I'm still getting paid regardless, right? I got them GetUpside checks and BetOnline checks coming. So I'm gonna be all right. But I don't know if Matt Ryan's gonna be all right. I don't know if Arthur Smith's gonna be all right. I don't know if Terry Fontenot's gonna be all right. So that's the last point I'll say. Again, I was gonna save that rant for the upcoming offensive line year-end review that would probably do Monday. But you kind of heard it now. So we'll touch upon it again on Monday when we get to it. But to close out the week on Friday, we will do a Q&A and a mailbag. So you guys can submit your questions, whether they're draft related, roster related, salary cap related, whatever the case may be. You just want to, get my advice on, flavors of chicken wings that you should be serving at your Super Bowl party, then, I got those takes too. So whatever you want to talk about, we can talk about on tomorrow's episode. Of course, hit me up on Twitter at Locked On Falcons, on Facebook at Locked On Falcons. You can send an email to lockedonfalcons@mail.com, or you can leave a comment here on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel, all those places. And, after you close out this Locked On Falcons episode, this illustrious episode, might as well check out the Locked On Bets podcast for your second listen. If you're not going to check out the Locked On Hawks, the Locked On Braves, or Locked On Bulldogs, or check them all out and then check out Locked On Bets, where handicapping expert Lee Sterling is giving you his daily picks, his ball specialist, his lock of the day. Maybe Lee's got some better advice for this weekend's, conference championship action, over unders, money line, all that various stuff. So check out Locked On Bets, free and available on all the same podcast platforms that you can find Locked On Falcons. So guys, that will do it for us today. I hope this was an informative look at the Falcons' red zone issues and ways that they can get better. Again, I think a lot of it is linked to the offensive line. It just feels like so much will get better. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say, like, me, I don't like being the guy that's like, oh, you fix this one problem, all your other problems go away. But it does feel like if you can just get competent offensive line play, if you can go from a bottom 5 offensive line to at least middle of the pack, like, it seems like so much of what the Falcons wanted to do in 2021 will start to work a lot better for them in 2022. Again, I don't know if that's going to mean all of a sudden they're a playoff team, but it's going to certainly feel like a lot of these issues start to go away. I'm going to be that guy. So I guess I am going to be that guy. So there you guys have it. Appreciate it. Until then.